Ryan, thanks for joining the show. This is always fun to connect with alumni. I'm doing a bit of a series on gathering stories from alumni for a book that I'm writing based on all the things that we've developed and done over the last few years. So for people tuning in, all of these stories I've been gathering, I sent out the manuscript to alumni like Ryan here and all of our other alumni. Many have gotten back saying they have stories to offer. I want to learn about those stories and figure out how to integrate them into the eventual book. That's the only thing that's missing. And Ryan says he has a story. And then we're also going to dive into some other fun dreams that we have in Groundwork. And some of these 7 conditions for transformation can impact your world in education. If we could have anything we wanted, like what would it look like? I think that'd be a fun conversation to have that could be beneficial too. So Ryan, you want to start by introducing yourself to the show?
You bet. I am Ryan Marshall. I'm a school counselor by profession in the Salem, Oregon area. I get to work and serve at South Salem High School on a daily basis. My dream job. I love it. Get to work with students. Have been in this role for 9 years at South, 11 total across my lifespan. I'm born in Oregon, but grew up in Salem and spent about 10 years up in Spokane with my wife. And then we started having kids and family was here in Salem. So we came back and have fallen in love with Salem, the community here in so many different ways over the course of the last few years. I'm a leadership nerd. I nerd out on this stuff. I have a minor in leadership studies. And so it's always been something that has been central to the core of me, and I love the opportunity to talk as much as I can. I don't know everything, still learning a lot, but to get an opportunity just to dive into some of those concepts, theories, and how it's been playing out in my own life, personally, professionally, I'm pumped to be here.
What Ryan isn't mentioning is he's not just any counselor, but been nationally recognized for the work that you've done. And I'm not even sure the capacity to the handbook that you've really helped, been instrumental in putting together. In fact, the reason why you were able to do Groundwork the year that you were is because you were given sabbatical by the district to start piecing that together and writing it. And correct me if I'm wrong, but it's tailored to responding to crisis, correct?
Correct. Absolutely.
Yeah. Is there official name title for it? You want to?
Yeah, well, it's our school district's crisis response plan. And
There we go.
The way we define crisis within our district is any sort of adverse impact to the daily functions and operations of schools and the buildings that serve our students. So that could look, there's a quote that if you've responded to one crisis, you've responded to one crisis. Every single one looks different and carries an entirely new, nuanced, complex layer of responsibilities and tasks. And this manual that I was fortunate enough to have a year to spend putting together and writing is just a compilation of best practice and evidence-based interventions to help students heal and staff work through some of our hardest times in life.
It's not a small undertaking. The district is pretty large here, second largest after Portland, I believe.
Correct.
So thousands of teachers. What is it, 45 something thousand students?
Correct.
In the district. So huge undertaking. So pretty amazing that you were able to do that, and probably an amazing learning experience for you and massive dividends for the district, because I've worked with enough educators, with enough schools to know that crisis isn't like once a year. It's often in different forms and different ways, and there's not enough capacity and people that can really engage in and help in that. So having something like this manual, I imagine, is going to be massive for people. So awesome having you. And again, we've had all sorts of walks of life of leaders go through the Institute, and it was fun having you this last year in the program and developing a relationship with you. It's probably one of the greatest gifts of my life, to be honest, is to go through, to have been able to run the Institute the last few years and then get so many close relationships with different leaders of different backgrounds that I would have never otherwise met. And it's a gift. So I appreciate being able to develop that relationship with you.
Oh, that feeling's mutual. And having grown up in Salem and not enjoying my time in terms of what Salem had to offer as a city for a lot of my younger years, being completely ignorant and naive to how awesome of a city this and community this place really is. The gift that Groundwork gave in so many different ways through those relationships and an understanding of the people committed to this city and to transformation across every single arena, profession, corner of Salem, Kaiser, these communities. It's awesome. I just love it. And again, I'm falling more and more in love with the city and all that it has to offer.
I think it was one of your cohort mates, I guess we call Jordan.
Yeah.
He said in I'll never forget one of his takeaway from this last year. He's like, I never wanted to live here in Salem.
Yep.
I've tried to find ways to leave, but now after meeting all of you,
Yeah.
developing these relationships, he never wants to leave. And it's pretty powerful that an experience like that can do that, by just building relationships with a handful of people opens your eyes to what's here in our community and the depth of relationships that we can build with other people as part of the power there. Well, let's dive in, man. You read some of the manuscript or as much as you could, and that some stories came up. And so I'd love to hear what you're thinking.
Yeah, thank you for this opportunity again. And it'll be like timing is just so perfect for me and what our South Salem High School community has been through in the last 4 or 5 weeks. The system that I was able to put in place in part thanks to the sabbatical granted through the school district and also the learning I went through last year through my participation in Groundwork, what that laid in terms of a foundation for our district this year. It's just this living, breathing system to respond in times of crisis. And for anyone unfamiliar with what our community experienced within the last 5 weeks or so, we had a shooting that happened off campus just 3 blocks from our school, and it significantly impacted to a point that in all the 11 years that I've been involved with crisis response teams across different districts and multiple schools, I've never seen as complex and deep, nuanced a response as what we saw and are still seeing the ripple effects of some unfortunate decisions, some life-altering, in the most drastic ways, decisions that impacted our community, both from a school and also within Salem. And that's where, about that same time, the manuscript was presented. You sent it my way, and I started in the time that I had just reading through it and starting to see a lot of different connections to what we were experiencing within our school and just how much leadership opportunities and transformational change there were that was happening within the context of crisis and within the system that was built, again, thanks to my time on sabbatical and Groundwork. That the way that I wrote that manual and our team of collaborators was so much credit to the lens that I was looking through thanks to Groundwork and those relationships and the different community organizations that we can now loop in, having a deeper understanding of people, seeing people for what they bring in crisis. So often our Western response to death and to grief is to put it in a nice tidy box and not to process it in a very systematized way. There's long thought, like the stages of grief where you go through this sequentially and then you're done. And thanks to the last year, it's really transforming the understanding of what grief and what loss really looks like on a profound level, both in depth and breadth. And we were able to put that system into place imperfectly, certainly, over the course of the last 5 weeks. But the difference in the way that we responded in the last 5 weeks compared to other responses was night and day. And I don't want to say I'm excited to talk about that. I'm grateful for the opportunity to share those stories and everything I can today with you, Chris. It's because of a tragedy, and I don't want to lose sight of that as well.
Yeah, it's not easy to talk about crisis at that magnitude, because there was fatality involved, and it was terrible what happened, and people are going to be impacted forever, and so there's always a sensitivity to have around discussing it, but also it has to be discussed, especially for roles like yours. What do we do in these moments? How do we respond intentionally? Instead of letting, and we talk about this in Groundwork, instead of just letting the events of life control our responses, how do we engage with it intentionally and not let it control us. And we talk about suffering well a
Mm,
lot in the
mm,
curriculum, right? And talk about suffering, things of this nature that happen all the time all over the world, but now close to home with us, it's suffering at a
mm,
very, very high level. And how do we work through that in a way that's going to, again, it's even hard to say, but be helpful, right?
mhm, mhm.
And acknowledge the loss, acknowledge the circumstances. So I'm interested to hear, if you're willing to share, how,
Yeah.
like, some of the, maybe the specifics of certain
Mhm,
ideas or concepts that were informing some of your response to this, and then the difference, the contrast
mm,
of what would have been done
mm.
in the past. Like you said, in Western culture, maybe
Right.
we typically put it in a box. Like, how does it differ, and
Mm,
what's the outcome, especially for people that really care
mm,
about this? One quick example, and then I want to hear your thoughts on that. We were working a few years ago. We were working on foster care, helping families stay together, when it's possible, kind of a thing, and that attributes to a lot of other outcomes, for those kids as they grow up. And the goal was to decrease it by a certain percent, and massive win for some people, right? Or one part of the community was homelessness too, like
mm,
decreasing homelessness, especially child homelessness and kids that didn't have a. And there's these metrics that we would be tracking, and some of them were massive changes, 30, 40, 50% changes. And I'm not going to go into details on them, but there was this moment where I'm sitting in this meeting where they're reporting back some of these changes, and it's like, that's amazing. Most people don't have any idea that happened,
mm,
right? In our
mm,
community, they
mm.
wouldn't know the difference. I wake up in the morning, I wouldn't know that's changed, and it's right, a few blocks down the street, what have you. So I'm saying that as an example of, because crisis and tragedy like this, for people that aren't directly involved, it's horrible. It hurts our soul.
Mm,
But for people that are so closely connected to it,
mm,
like, what is the difference for
mm.
them in some of the approaches that have been made that you feel are better than maybe they were X amount of years ago?
I think I can start with what past practice has been, though really well informed and came through training, came through great intention by teams in the past. Oftentimes, that past practice is you'd have a team arrive at a site and perform great work for a day and then step away, and the school would be then tasked with returning to normal on their own from that point forward. And occasionally, depending on what the actual crisis was, we might spend another day or
Mhm.
two with that school, but there wasn't a prolonged response. And it did feel very transactional in a lot of ways. It was, here's a team, we're giving you this service, now we're out. The
Mhm.
difference in the way the system is now set up is it's it is a postvention defined effort that is now across multiple days. The team will be present both in like physicality, will be at the site, and will also be behind the scenes working in several different ways. And to your point, a lot of times a school or a teacher or staff member or even students may not understand or may not see the full scope of the response, but those extra additions are what have led to relationships with local licensed professional counselors that
Mhm.
came on site and spent time with students and staff to help process the crisis that happened. That's never been possible before.
Mhm.
The relationships and the foundation built within the system allowed us to pause school for a few hours on one of the days so that staff could process together. And though, again, it wasn't a perfect scenario, the fact that we were even allowed or offered that opportunity was a change.
Mhm.
Our team built in multiple pipelines of feedback loops from staff, and that was a big addition as well. And the purpose of that goes right to the fertilization funnel that we learn about through Groundwork, that we kept asking one more question, one more deeper question to try to get to what is it that would serve staff, help with healing, help with restoration, both on the student and staff level, to allow them to, one, be seen, to be affirmed in their hurt and their loss, and three, to feel like they had some sort of tangible grasp on the healing process, that they had a voice in determining where our systems would flow into and where we would support. So that's probably the biggest connection that I've seen, is moving the system from transactional to transformational.
I know we talk about this in our programming till we're all blue in the face. The transaction is the handshake.
Mm-hmm.
That's a transaction. It can have a lot of different meanings, but at the end of the day, it's a handshake. And the transformation is that hongi, right? It's that ongno. It's different. It's deep. It's intentional.
First thing that I come to is just an authentic understanding of the person across the table, the person in the room, the group of educators who are tasked with providing school at its highest, public education at its highest for our students and our community and our future, to be able to see them and what we are asking of them, both on a daily basis, but when crisis strikes, that they would feel that that giant ask is acknowledged and it's accounted for. That question is often disregarded in society, and what I've seen across public education in general is that is what we ask our educators to do is significant, and it's often disregarded. And so transformation to me is just getting leadership, getting our team, getting anyone who is stepping into a role of service towards healing, staff, student alike, is acknowledging what is truly going on. And so I think we were getting to that. We are getting to that. We're still in the process of that, but that was very much part of our efforts. And I'll tell you what came along with that was our district leadership, our crisis response leadership, stepping into conversations with staff who were so deeply impacted and apologizing that we were getting things wrong along the way in real time, hearing our superintendent, our deputy assistant superintendent, our director of safety and risk step into the space and say, I want you to know how sorry I am that I haven't gotten this perfectly, because you deserve perfect in this space. That is, to me, was very powerful and spoke to a level of integrity and that authentic, I see you message that we desperately need as educators.
Yeah.
So that's where I would start. And, transformation beyond that is getting someone to a place where their new normal, their new reality is acknowledging the pain, acknowledging the hurt, but feeling like they have the grasp on the job that they get to do. And there's an element of control back in their life to step forward and move forward into a place of healing and wholeness.
A lot of great nuggets in there. One is just something to point out. There's a lot of those people that you listed off. You didn't list names, but I'm connecting dots and realizing there's a lot of alumni to Groundwork, right?
Bingo.
Which kind of goes to the power again of deep and trusting relationships, power of transformation. You can't unsee it. We talk about the hongi, the ongno. You can't do that with another human being and forget it. And so even though it's not a physical thing, perhaps, like metaphorically, we're going that deep in our programming, in our curriculum. And so it's hard to unsee it. You have to intentionally make the decision, like, I'm going to just shake a hand today. I'm not going to, and then you have to stare at yourself in the mirror and realize that I made that conscious choice before. Maybe it was unconscious. Like I made a habit out of it, but now I can't unsee it. So I'm making a more conscious choice than ever before to be intentional, to see, to have empathy, because I've had these experiences. So I thought of that when you were talking, which I think is really important. Another thing I heard was vulnerability. You didn't say that word, but telling the truth. Those examples, the way we talk about vulnerability in our curriculum is to just tell the truth. And that's hard to do. And I think a lot of times we mistake vulnerability of like, well, I'm going to put myself in harm's way. That is one definition of vulnerability, but the way that we're talking about it is the vulnerability to just tell the truth, and the risk is, what are people going to do when I tell the truth? Are they going to take advantage of that truth? And sometimes they might, right? That's not on us, right? We were being authentic and we were telling the truth. But in most cases, I would say almost all cases, when it's genuine and it's authentic, like the situations you shared, how wonderful is it to get that vulnerability from people?
Mhm.
We didn't do this. I should have done this, because now there is truth. And in the peace building world, we talk about reconciliation and helping people reconcile, especially in deep and heavy conflict when there's been horrible things that happen. Truth is one of the things that need to be at the table, and you need justice, you need truth, you need forgiveness. Uh, those are the things that have to be there, and I would say it's similar things are needed in times of grief as well, because like you mentioned at the latter end of your comments, those that are closest to it, it's hard because we all like to have control when something tragic happens in our life. It's like the ultimate, I don't have control. Something horrible happened and I don't have any control over it. And so to give people some of the voice and some control just gives some of that void back at a small fraction. You can never replace it, but it lets people feel like they're heard, and of all the things you can't control, there it's giving some of that back. I think there's a lot of amazing sort of strings connected here, and by no means am I ever going to make the claim that Groundwork's a difference maker here, but I'm just curious to see how it's contributed
Yeah.
to growth and to change and to better outcomes, because I believe that's why we created it, and why it exists, and it's manifested through people like yourself that took information, took an experience, internalized it, and went out and did something with it. So thanks for sharing all of that.
The thing that keeps coming to my head is just replaying the moment when our school went into lockdown during that time. And for us, we went into a level 3 lockdown, which within our district means there's an active threat inside the school walls. And though there was belief at the time that there may be. And so out of safety and precaution, our district and our school went into this level 3 lockdown. And I, at the time, was in a classroom with a couple students, and our counselors were there. We were there to give a lesson that day. And students hadn't entered the space yet, but other than a couple and the four of us counselors. And in that moment of processing, we're in a level 3 lockdown. I know what that means. I have no information on other than we're in lockdown. I don't know what's going on, but I'm hearing popping sounds in our building because it's so silent that we can, what we learned was pipes that are just going through our building, but sounded like distant gunfire, if I'm being fully vulnerable right now, and processing those noises. And as you talk about suffering well, what the gift that I felt like I had in that moment, and again, in part through training, in part through groundwork, in part with the system that was built, was that there was a moment where I had to decide, or I recognized that action was needed and that I could do something. And that action was, okay, we need to start putting together our communication plan for students and staff after we come out of lockdown. We had moved from level 3 to level 2, which meant there was no longer a active threat, or they cleared the idea of an active threat. So we were in level 2 lockdown at that moment. And that meant that we would be released at some point soon. So we needed to have a communication plan. So I pulled open my computer and started typing that out. And again, the gift that provided me in that moment was feeling like I could step forward as opposed to being paralyzed in a moment of fear. Every educator's, every parent, every student's worst nightmare. I had no idea, again, what the details were, but I knew that here's one step forward in this moment that would prove to be helpful.
Yeah.
How that translates across every educator, I'm not sure yet. I haven't fully processed what is it in those moments that can help anchor us to suffer well, to be able to show up as our best selves. We'll get there, but yeah.
Yeah, man. I'm feeling some of the fear and anxiety that would come along just hearing you share that, like being in that situation. is terrifying just hearing about it, let alone, you and others and students and
mm,
parents and everybody else closely involved living it. It's
mm,
just,
mm,
holy cow,
mm.
And then, there's people like me literally a few blocks down the street from the school. I
Right.
still remember the day. I didn't
Mm,
have any idea things were going on in the moment. Right.
right. Right.
And I'm down the street in my office. It's real. This is real. But,
Mm,
um,
mm,
to kind of remove from the actual situation and talk about this concept of in times where there is fear,
mm,
whether it's, completely coming from us in a situation where there's nothing externally to fear, or in times like what you're mentioning, where there is
mm,
something outside externally to cause fear. Um, Maybe the response, and this is just a maybe, right? Maybe the response is similar in both
mm,
situations,
mm,
right? Because it resorted back to what you said is a choice that you made. You said there was this moment where I realized I can act right now. I can do something, right? Instead of letting it paralyze me or the
mhm,
fear consume me. And we talk a lot about facing fears in our curriculum as well, right? Right.
mhm,
As we talk about suffering well, because they're so connected.
mm.
And I'm new to Twitter, whatever it is. You welcomed me, but I put out a tweet the other day. It was faking bravery when we're terrified is bravery. And that's all bravery is.
Mm,
We're just faking bravery when we're terrified, and that's what being brave is. And so what is it? This
mm,
goes to your question, like what is it that in those moments causes us to fake it or to act, and maybe it's exposure in a controlled, non-threatening environment. I mean, some of the things that we dive into in our programming are bringing people to places that are not comfortable. We're not like putting people in extreme, like we're not doing cold plunges, and that's what I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about just personally, mentally, like the concepts that we're covering, and we're not forcing people to do anything, but through stories that are shared, through examples that are given, it's allowing people in their own way, we'll call it their safe way, to explore these thoughts where typically we probably just push them aside. We don't really think about them. And then all of a sudden we're experiencing it and we've never faced it before. So I think it has to do with something around the exposure to the ideas themselves and the repetition and consistency in talking about them, to where when the moment arises, I've already made the choice, of how I respond to these situations.
And I think to your point that anyone who, I don't know who all will listen to this other than probably my wife and my mom, but I know you have listeners, and the applicability isn't that, as not everyone's going to be a public educator, and hopefully not everyone will be in this situation or experience a crisis like this. But grief and loss is very real in this
Mm-hmm.
world, and it is a part of life that has to be reconciled. And the continual learning that I've done in this area is that grief it's not time bound, and that the gift that we can give others who are in a time of grief and loss is one, acknowledging that it doesn't have to be confined to a box. It's
Mm-hmm.
that this is an open-ended relationship. This is an open-ended conversation, and we're here for you. Like, we're here for that grief. We're here for that suffering. So that, person to person, human to human, there's compassion and kindness in that gift that I have found to be anchoring for those that I've worked with, students and adults alike. The other key learning part in all of this is the willingness to communicate with each other and not shying away from those really difficult and hard conversations that are so present in crisis, so present in loss, so present in grief. I think about the accountability shuffle too, and maybe this is a good segue into the greater conversation that we've talked about having too, is when I am conceptualizing in a relationship an opportunity for me to use the shovel, it's not because I'm thinking about the tip. And I think what I found, especially in the last year, is that shovel you can't think about the very tip of it, which is the accountability piece of it. You have to go into the use of the shovel with the widest part of it as that's your intention. That's where you start. And it's one, acknowledging your willingness to change first, right? I saw that lived out by our district leadership in this moment, but also have seen it in every relationship, is like my willingness to say, I got this wrong, or hey, I think I need a deeper understanding of what's going on. And that's, that next layer of seeking understanding. To me, that's where the bread and butter of humanity is. That if we can step into those relationships, especially in the time of crisis, especially in grief and loss, if we can just see people deeper and use that shuffle effectively in that way, that's where I see transformation happening, is when someone feels seen and affirmed and feeling like their most authentic self is valued, no matter what. Even if you may disagree wholeheartedly in their life choices, the decisions that they've made, just your willingness to be present in that space, that to me is gold.
No, that's powerful. We need connection, right? We talk about the space between, the thing that connects us inseparably to others. We all are connected. We're either connected in a separate kind of a way, or we're connected in a together kind of a way. But the connection we cannot escape. And the interesting thing about that I found about the connection, though, is that for it to be a connected in a together kind of a way, the connection itself needs an audience, because that's where we feel seen. That's where we feel cared for, and I think there's a level to why we get into deeper relationships. We choose partners, friends, family, you name it, is because that sort of connection that we all want, it needs an audience to thrive. You lose that connection, people stop seeing each other, connecting, friends go separate ways. They lose that audience to that space between. They're still connected, just in a separate kind of a way. So the connection itself needs an audience, because, like you said, we start to validate and see one another, and we understand that we both, to thrive, need that from one another. It's an us relationship. We've been specifically talking about response to crisis through your story, but kind of, if we were to broaden that, what's missing for, we'll just talk about the educators right now,
Right.
Because we always talk about like the kids. That's the easy thing to talk about in education. We do this for the kids. That's like the heart. But also, well, what about those that are the ones teaching the kids, right? What about those that are spending all the time with them, influencing them? With your experience in groundwork, let's say, because there's a lot of things that could help teachers and educators, but specifically with what your experience in groundwork was, what's missing for teachers, for educators, for anybody involved in influencing kids, to help them become the best versions of themselves?
I love that question, and I'm so grateful that someone's asking it. That you're asking it. That question is that I feel seen. Honestly, like I feel like thinking through the colleagues that I serve every day with, we need more people asking that question, especially people with influence like you. So thank you for that. 3 things come to mind that I've never really conceptualized until this moment. So let's see if I get this said eloquently. The 3 things that come to mind are 3 things that I feel like in my 11 years as a public educator, I have learned to be incredibly true. 1, students thrive in relationship. 2, staff or educators really want to know students on a deeper level than we do. We want to know their stories. We want to see them as people, and we understand that that concept 1, that students thrive on relationships, is paramount. And 3, the issue is that what we have created in public education as a society over time is that those relationships are not possible because of time and because of the capacity within our schools and the systems we've created. So knowing those 3 things, what's missing, where can growth happen, where can leadership happen? I think one is providing educators with time and energy, for sure, to be able to do what they do best, which is one, form those transformational relationships with students to a point where students show up and are wanting to learn, because there's an accountability piece to that educator that they have, a commitment to their own personal goals, who they are, culturally who they are, but also because they have someone in their classroom who sees them for who they are and says, I'm going to show up as my best self and I'm going to provide you education at its highest. So to me, it's providing staff with the training to know students on a deeper level, to be able to ask questions and move through conflict, move through some of those abrasive barriers that sometimes students put up out of defensiveness. Sometimes students put up because culturally they are have been scorned by authority. They have learned that authority is not to be trusted, but really to create a space, to create a learning opportunity for our educators, that to be able to see on a deeper level what our students are asked every day that they show up here at school, what it is that we are asking them, and then find ways to help them develop those trusting, healthy, authentic relationships where they are held accountable to learning.
It's an unfair question, but what would be the percentage of educators that feel equipped and competent to build those relationships? Is it a competency and capability, or is it all just time and capacity?
Yeah. Think about it in terms, and I've used this analogy before, so forgive me if I've shared it with you and it's repetitive, but the analogy of, the world's best juggler can juggle, I've looked it up at some point, I think it's like 12 flaming torches. The world's best juggler can, the world record is 12 flaming torches. At 13, that juggler no longer is juggling. It's no longer doing what he does best, which is juggle flaming torches. It's the world's best. And at 13 flaming torches is no longer capable of doing it. And I feel like that's what we've asked our educators to do, is the more we ask, the more we put in their classroom, the more responsibility that exists. We're taking our world's best educators and completely minimalizing what they do best. So I think that probably 90% of our educators have the skills and the tools to form a healthy relationships with students. And I would say probably, 80% of those feel like they don't have the ability to do it. What I really think is there's a smaller percentage of educators who feel equipped in times of conflict, whether it's conflict resolution, whether it's getting past, because of everything that's being asked of them, the patience, the time, the space to allow a student to present in their most authentic self in that moment, which could be abrasive, could be defensive, could be aggressive, to provide them space to do it, and then to use that shovel analogy to seek understanding in those moments. That's the tool that I think would be so helpful for all of us educators. It's been helpful for me, and I've got a high ego of what I do on a daily basis. Like, I'm confident in my ability to meet a student where they're at and form a great relationship and help them get from one point to another. And I learned so much from Groundwork that I'm applying on a daily basis, if that makes sense.
Yeah. So it's more of like you said, kind of the time and energy, the capacity. They're more than capable it's more of a capacity and intentionality behind it.
Well, and I
Instead
think,
of
yeah,
being an expectation. Well,
yeah,
you're a teacher. You're supposed to
yeah,
develop good relationships, but instead of making it an expectation, be intentional in creating the capacity and the space for them to feel equipped to do it.
yeah. Well, yeah,
Yeah.
and to me, it's what I love about the framework, what I love about what I learned in the last year is I've appreciated that it's allowed me now to be more effective and efficient in those moments and in those spaces, as opposed to feeling ill-equipped, as opposed to feeling like, oh gosh, I learned something at some point about conflict resolution.
Mm,
Let me search through my toolkit of skills. I don't want to enter a relationship thinking about what skill am I using and applying here. I just want to enter a relationship and feel equipped to be able to, whatever is presented back my way, I want to step into that space and be confident that I'm going
mm,
to rise to the occasion, if that makes sense. That's the gift. So to me, what Groundwork could provide, what that leadership training could provide for educators, is a more effective, more efficient way to meet students in those spaces,
mm,
and in those moments that crisis happens, that trauma happens, that we're there and we're present for it, and we're able to provide the support and the safety and the stability that a student needs in that moment to then show up a better version of themselves and learn at a higher, deeper rate.
yeah. It's in those moments that it really matters.
Mm.
What's the saying? A good man isn't good when they're only good when things are good.
Yeah,
you
yeah,
know,
right, right,
like a good teacher isn't
right.
good if they're only good when things are good. And honestly, it really just comes down to the investment in the development of an individual.
Mm.
The time and intentionality to invest in them pays off because it creates the capacity within them to react differently. So in a dream world, I mean,
Mm.
if you could paint a
Yeah.
tapestry of what this would look like
Mm.
to address some of those needs that educators have, what would you do?
Mm. Dream world, I would take 15 high school students and 15 teacher leaders, educator leaders, and put them through a year of groundwork and do it collectively and allow that group to see each other and tackle some of our public education system's greatest needs right now. I'd put them in a space together and opportunity to learn together, grow together, be vulnerable together. That would be my ideal world, and I'm not sure how that plays out, given the confines of contracts and budget issues across our
Mm-hmm.
communities and across our nation. But I know that space, those conversations, the opportunity to connect outside of the school setting, um, whew, that could be really powerful.
Yeah. So 15.
I would take everybody. I mean, I could give
Yeah.
it to everybody, but really, if you're going to start, I'd
If you're
start.
starting in a school,
Yeah.
15 of key influencers at
Hmm.
the adult level and the student level.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then what happens after that? I mean, what
Yeah.
what do they then go back
Hmm.
and do? What
Yeah.
challenges are they addressing or tackling together?
Hmm. Yeah. I think one is apathy across the school, trying to identify how do we get students to buy into their learning, their futures, finding purpose, finding desire to be here and to learn. That's one of the things, just
Mm,
truancy and attendance rates are down across the nation. And so if we can tackle that, that'd be great. I think resource development, identifying there are so many students that are without in our community and so many great community organizations that are trying to tackle that on a systemic level, which is great. I've been so grateful for those partnerships. And yet there are so many families that are still without, and that number continues to climb every year. Those are two things that we haven't even started talking about grades at all yet. But if to me, I believe if you can provide students with their most basic needs, they're going to be here. And if you can provide students with the why, they're going to want to learn.
mhm. Yeah. And so it's almost on both sides, both tracks. You got the adults,
Mm-hmm.
the educators, the students. you're
Mhm.
equipping them with these experiences, these moments, and then almost setting them loose back out into their community
Yep.
to instill the purpose,
Mhm.
instill the principles, and almost giving them sort of the creative power of, well, you know, you've learned these things together, had these experiences. How do we get other? How do we kind of
Right.
root in the rest of this seed into the soil of your school, of your
Mhm.
community, and
Mhm.
letting them kind of go figure out where we talk about problems of practice
Right.
at the community level, it becomes problems of practice in their own school. Yeah.
Right. Right. And that's part of the ask. That's part of the challenge. That's part of the gift of that learning, is that now go impart that, go find ways that you can move this learning forward. Yeah, within your communities, within your families, within the relationships that you have with friends and with adults and sports and music and theater. It gives students and staff opportunities to be in those, to have more courageous conversations, to have more opportunities to see people deeply.
Yeah. Hmm. That's interesting, because everything within Groundwork, they're just ideas. They're
Mm.
they're they're nothing special until they're implemented by somebody. And I think what people can do with an idea and what people can do with a concept is really what makes things start to be transformative. And so I love hearing these sort of ideas to think about all the ways that concepts like this can be applied. And I think that that's a powerful one, to bring people together, students and adults, empower them, equip them, and then let them, you know, take charge in the tribe that's theirs. Help them,
Mm.
give them responsibility. I think that's when things start to really unfold, right? And there's a lot of sort of probably bureaucracy and all sorts of loops to jump through to even get something like that at
Mm.
scale. But like you said from the beginning, it's worth the question to ask.
Right.
It's worth the question to ask, because we don't discover anything if we're, and we talk about this, and you've heard me talk about this, if we're all worth thinking about what's probable, then
Mm.
we won't ever come up with anything that's transformational, because it starts from thinking of what's possible. So what's possible if we were to do something like this? I think some of the best solutions, ideas, and outcomes come from that possible mindset, what's
Mm.
possible here. So let's keep thinking about that, of what's possible in education along these lines of thinking, and keep the conversation going. Brian, this has been fruitful for me. A lot of amazing story to be thinking about. Great conversation in general, and it's always a pleasure. So thank you.
Yeah. Yeah. Likewise. Appreciate you, man.
Thanks anyone who's been tuning in and listening. And until next time, be safe.